If you're curious to know just how the housing market in Louisville, Kentucky is trending as we head into the spring of 2026, congratulations, you're in the right place. My name is Emily Price with the Price Group at Keller Williams Collective, and today I'm going to walk you through our monthly market update, where I walk you through 5 key metrics that help us to understand just exactly how the market is behaving and how it's trending. This is an important conversation if you're thinking about buying this year, or if you're thinking about selling. Either way, it's good to know what opportunities are in the market for you and whether the market is moving towards you or away from you as a buyer or a seller. And ultimately, if you own property in the Louisville, Kentucky housing market, you're definitely going to want to follow along with me, because how the market trends and behaves greatly and always impacts just what exactly is happening to your equity in your property. I'm Emily Price with the Price Group at Keller Williams Collective. Join me right now and let's take a look at our March 2026 housing market update. When we're looking at our monthly market update for Louisville, Kentucky, when it comes to the housing market, one of the metrics that we look at is the inventory count. What this refers to is the number of homes for sale in today's market. So another way of thinking about it is how many sellers are on the market looking to sell their property. So that is representative of the supply. And another way to think about it is if you're the buyer, you think about how many choices you have available in the marketplace to you right now. So when we take a look at that today in the greater Louisville housing market, we have a little over 3,000 choices on the market, 3,111 to be exact. Now, if you rewind it to 4 weeks ago at the end of February, we had about the same 3,038. So give or take about 60, 70 or so houses. Now at the top of the year, so if you go back 90 days, again, we were hovering about that same area at 3,085. So we've been just a breath above 3,000, give or take, since the top of the year, with right now going into April being the highest that we've seen. Now, this time last year, so same time last year, wrapping Q1 and getting ready to go into Q2, there was a drastic difference. This time last year, going into April of 2025, we had 2,245 homes on the market. That's roughly a 900-ish difference between the number of choices available today in 2026 as compared to this time last year in 2025. Another way of thinking about it is that the inventory, or the amount of sellers on the market, the amount of choices a buyer has increased by 38.6% since this time last year. When we're studying how the housing market in Louisville, Kentucky is behaving as we go into the spring of 2026, one of the things that we want to pay attention to is that we want to pay attention to how long it is taking a seller to go from for sale to contract accepted. So we're talking about the time, the number of days, usually from when a new property hits the market as a new listing to the date that it's contract accepted. Buyer made an offer, seller and buyer negotiated it, and they came to an acceptance. Now, this is different than how long it takes to close on a property. So we're just talking about the marketing time frame for the seller's property to be marketed and the buyer with the acceptable offer to be secured. So today, as we wrap March of 2026, it's taking on average 67 days. That's a little over 2 months. So you're gonna have a little over 2 months on market average in order to find your seller. Now, this is up a little bit from where we were 4 weeks ago. At the end of February, we were sitting at about 59 days on market. Now, at the start of the year, so at the start of the year as we were going, from in the holiday season and in the middle of the winter, we were higher. We were at 98 days on market. Now, this time last year, so when we think about the wrap of March in 2026 versus the end of March in 2025, we are higher today. It's taking longer today than it was this time last year. This time last year, it was taking about 53 days for the seller to go through the marketing process, and today it's taking about 67 days. That makes sense when we also note that the inventory is up today as it was in comparison this time last year. When you're looking at the housing market, obviously one of the things you want to pay attention to is the sold price. What is happening in the trend of the prices that homes are selling for? Well, in the greater Louisville market, here's where we are today. As we conclude March and we go into April of 2026, the average sold price for a property in Louisville is right underneath $310,000. We're at $309,291. Now, where does that compare to where we were just a month ago? Well, the average price point today at the end of March is lower than what the average price point was at the end of February. At the end of February, again, about 4 weeks ago, we were right under $350,000. We were sitting at $349,767 as the average price point. Now, where does that compare to as we started the top of 2026? Well, as we turned into the new year about 90 days ago, our average price point was sitting at $329,454. So if you think about the start of 26, $329,000, we were here. And then 4 weeks ago, we were up at $349,000. And today, rounding out the spring, we are at $309,000. So our average price point today is lower than it's been since the start of lower than where it was at the start of the year, and lower than where it was just 4 weeks ago. Now, how does today's average price point at $309,291 compare to the average sales price of this time last year? So this time last year, remember, days on market were a little tighter. The inventory was a little less than it is today. So today, days on market have gotten longer. The inventory, the number of choices available on the market has gotten greater. So how does that stack up against price point? Well, this time last year, the average price point was $326,548. So the average sales price this time last year was higher than it is right now. So again, 12 months ago, we were at about $326,500, and today we're at about $309,200. So as you're paying attention to what the real estate market is doing, here in Louisville, Kentucky, something that goes hand in hand in our market and in any market is also that of how the interest rate is performing, specifically the mortgage rate. Now, interest is the cost of borrowing money. So when a buyer gets a mortgage, they're paying interest on the amount of money that they're borrowing, and that impacts what they're pre-approved for in terms of an overall purchase price. It also impacts what their monthly payment is. So another way of saying all of that is that the mortgage rate, the interest rate of the mortgage rate, affects the buyer's affordability, and it affects their buying power. So just exactly what are the interest rates doing right now as we wrap up Q1 and go into Q2? Well, when we look at the average 30-year mortgage rate today, as we're getting ready to round out March, it's sitting at 6.53%. The 15-year is a little underneath that at 6.07%. Now, how does this stack up to where we were just a month ago? Well, 4 weeks ago, they were a little bit lower, almost by a full half a point. So 4 weeks ago, we were at 5.99% as the 30-year average, and the 15-year rate average was at 5.58%. So again, today we're at 6.53 and 6.07 for the 30 and the 15-year respectively. So how does that stack up to where we started the year? Well, today they are a bit higher than how we started 2026. At the top of 2026, we were at 6.2 for the 30 and 5.74 for the 15. So when you're thinking about how that maps out, we started 2026 here, then it dropped a bit in February, at the end of February, and now as we go into the spring, it's going a bit back up. When you're paying attention to how the housing market is performing, one of the best measurements to pay attention to is that of the absorption rate. The absorption rate is a measurement of supply and demand, and specifically it's a measurement between how many sellers we have in the market versus how many buyers we have in the market. What the absorption rate tells us is it tells us how we're trending, whether we're in a seller's market, a balanced market, or a buyer's market, and what direction we're moving on that spectrum. So traditionally, what we think about is anything that's about 5 months or less is traditionally a seller's market. Now, what's important to know is that a seller's market that has a 1-month absorption rate performs and feels a whole lot different than a seller's market that has a 4-month absorption rate. While they're still technically a seller's market, they are definitely two different points along that scale. Okay, so we think about a balanced market being in that plus 5 months, 6 month range, and it tips over into a buyer's market when we hit a 7-month absorption rate or higher. So just where are we in the greater Louisville market today? So here we are wrapping up March of 2026, and today when we look at all of the sellers that are on the market, so it's a measurement of inventory, against the pace by which buyers are buying property, what we know is that we are sitting at a little over a 3-month absorption rate, 3.08 to be exact. So you're thinking, well, how do you measure that, Emily? Well, here's what you do. You take a look at all of the inventory that's currently on the market, and then you pretend, this doesn't exactly happen, but you pretend that no new inventory enters the market. So it's as if you pretend that the market freezes and the amount of inventory on the market is the amount of inventory there is. Then you look at the pace by which buyers have been buying property month over month. And then you say, well, if the buyers continued at the current pace, how long would it take that demand pacing from the buyers to buy out all of today's available inventory? And that's how you get the answer of 3.08 months for today. So how is that in comparison to this time 4 weeks ago? We're a little bit lower. The absorption rate has gotten a little tighter, which means it has moved a little bit in the favor of the seller. 4 weeks ago, we were at 3.74 months. Now, at the top of the year, when we went into 2026, we were at 2.85. So the absorption rate has moved slightly away from the seller and has taken a baby step towards the buyer since the top of 2026. Now, how does that trend in comparison to where we were this time last year in 2025? Well, as we were wrapping up March of 2025, the greater Louisville housing market was sitting at an absorption rate of 2.42 months. So the absorption rate was tighter, more in favor of the seller this time last year than this time this year. So last year we were at a 2.42 month absorption rate, and this time here in 2026, as we get ready to go into April and quarter 2, we're slightly above that at a 3.08 month absorption rate. If you find yourself thinking about buying property or selling property in the greater Louisville, Kentucky housing market, you need to stop what you're doing right now and make sure that you hit that subscribe button right here so that you can always follow along with me and be connected to our housing market updates that we deliver for you every single month. I'm Emily Price with the Price Group at Keller Williams Collective. And again, if you're thinking about buying or selling, or you own property in the greater Louisville area, so we're talking about Oldham County, Jefferson County, we extend into Hardin County and Elizabethtown, Bullitt County, and up towards southern Indiana, we pledge to our clients, our friends, our family, our neighbors, and our community that you can count on us to every single month deliver a thorough, concise, and yet easy to understand market update, so you know just exactly how the market is trending and how it impacts your equity if you're a current property owner and how it impacts your opportunities as a buyer or seller. We believe that facts give you clarity, and clarity is power. And when you have facts and clarity, then you're equipped to make the best decision possible for you and your family when it comes to real estate. You see, here at the Price Group, we take care of our people. We take care of our people in the move and all the years in between. I'm Emily Price with the Price Group at Keller Williams Collective. Follow along with me and don't ever miss a housing market update when it comes to the greater Louisville, Kentucky real estate market. Hit subscribe